can start now.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the June monthly lecture of the Varahamihira Science Forum. We have a very interesting lecture lined up from a very accomplished speaker. But before we get to the speaker, for those of you who are new to the forum, I'd like to give a very brief interview of what we are, how we started, and what we are trying to do. We are not, a complicated group. We are effectively just a WhatsApp group, a bunch of people curious and interested in science. And we wanted to host a series of lectures for the general public. So we have done that for nearly 5 years now. And that's our website. All our events are posted there. This is a snapshot of some of the lectures that we have hosted in the last few years. We have one lecture every month, which is our primary activity. We have all over social media. We have a Facebook page. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram. We are on YouTube. Just search for Varahamihira Science Forum in any of these, and you'll find us. We are also in WhatsApp, where we try to have a conversation about not just the lecture of the month, but general topics of science of interest to people. And so I have the names of 3 or 4, including my name. I'm Gopu. We have the phone numbers, and you can just message one of us, and we'll add you to the one of the chat groups, and you can join us in conversation. We started this with a series of physical lectures in the city of Madras about 5 years back. That was when there was some UNESCO had made some noise about Madras being recognized as a city of culture with music season and all that. And we are associated with another group called Tamil Heritage Trust, which also does several programs on culture. And so we asked the question: isn't science part of our culture? Because in our heritage program lectures, we generally talk about art, literature, music, even government, society, politics, war, dance, but rarely about science. And I thought that's something that we should celebrate, but not just Indian science, but science in general. The problem is the lectures or the programs related to science tend to be confined to academic or technical organizations. So a talk about medicine or even a conference about medicine may only happen at a medical college. The general public may not know what's happening. We'll have to depend on a journalist to report or something like that. And something on science, something on engineering, they happen in universities, they happen in kind of secluded forums. The general public cannot go and attend them. In fact, those talks are not targeted at the general public, who even at the educated public, who may have a 10th or 12th standard education, perhaps even a college education, but not too deeply into science. And that's kind of why we started the forum, to take these topics to the public. We've had several lectures on several topics. Just a sample that we show every year. We've been showing this for a few months. We had Professor Arvind Gupta gave us a very interesting demonstration, something called Science Through Toys, where he uses toys, discarded plastic tubes and toothpaste and bottles and things like that to demonstrate simple scientific principles. It was a big hit. The kids loved it. We had a meteorologist, K.V. Balasubramaniam, talk about weather and climate, the mentions about it in Sangam poetry and how related to modern meteorology. We had a professor of physics, Dr. Uttara Durarajan, talk about the women scientists of India, Leelavati's daughters. We had Aparajit Ramanath, a professor in Gujarat, gave us a lecture about the birth of India's aircraft manufacturing industry. In terms of, so it's a sample of the different kind of topics that we do. Today we are going to talk about medicine, in fact, ancient medicine, about a particular author, one of the most ancient of authors, Caraka, and his book Caraka Samhita. So we've had a few lectures on medicine. Our second or third lecture was this one, Hidden Phages of Medical History by Sivaraman, phages referring to bacteriophages, which were kind of some interesting topic before antibiotics really became a major factor. Then we had a lecture by Velinu Ramachandran, who gave a talk about neuroscience and relevance of Freud in modern neuroscience. This happened just before the lockdown. We had another talk on neuroscience by a very young person who just graduated, but they just got out of a doctoral programs, Nishant Chandrasekhar. He took us on a very interesting tour of the development of the history of neuroscience. One of our organizers, Ramanan, gave a talk about CRISPR, a gene editing tool, and how it's being used in modern medicine. Last year we had Dr. Ram Manohar, an Ayurveda doctor from the Amrita School of Ayurveda, give us a talk about whether Ayurveda is relevant, how does it connect to modern research, modern scientific practices. He even talked about how corona patients are being treated, or what we are learning from them, what the Ayurvedic scholars are learning from them. And last month, most recently, we had a lecture by Dr. Nimesh Gupta on a very topical subject, immunology of vaccines. He is a scientist and headed the vaccine immunology laboratory, and so very appropriate, and that went very well. And so today we are very proud to have Padma Vibhushan recipient Dr. Valiathan, who's an expert on, is a professional cardiac surgeon, and he agreed to give us a talk on Caraka Samhita. I heard him a few years back talk about ancient Indian medicine at the KV Sharma endowment lecture at a medical college near, a hospital near here. And so we are very lucky. That one of our friends, Dr. Mamata Dash, gave us his number, and he was very kind to agree to talk to us. So with that brief introduction of Varaha Mihira Science Forum, I'd like to pass on the mic to our friend Rajagopal to introduce the speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Gopu. So as you mentioned, we're privileged to have Dr. Valiathan with us today. I'll read out a very short, crisp introduction. It's excerpted from the Wikipedia page of Dr. Valiathan. Martanda Varma Shankaran Valiathan, MS Valiathan, he is an Indian cardiac surgeon, as Gopu mentioned. He is a former president of the Indian National Science Academy and National Research Professor of the Government of India. He was awarded the Padma Vibhushan in 2005 for his contributions to health technology in India. He was made a Chevalier in the Order des Palmes Academics, pardon my pronunciation, an honor bestowed by the French government in 1999. He received the Dr. Samuel Asper International Award from the Johns Hopkins University Medical School in 2009 for his contributions to international medical education. His early education was at a government school in Mavelikara in Kerala, followed by the University College Trivandrum. His medical education took place at the Medical College Trivandrum, University of Kerala, where he obtained his MBBS degree in the year 1956. He later went to the University of Liverpool in England as a surgical trainee and received his fellowship from the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh and England in 1960, and master's degree in surgery from the University of Liverpool. After a brief stint as a faculty member at the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Chandigarh, he underwent further training in cardiac surgery at the Johns Hopkins, George Washington, and Georgetown University hospitals in the US. He worked as a fellow of Doctors Vincent Gott at the Hopkins and Charles Hofnagel at the Georgetown University. He was also granted the fellowship of Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada in cardiovascular surgery in 1970. He served on the faculty of the Georgetown University Hospital, Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research, Indian Institute of Technology, IIT Madras, and as director of Sri Chitra Tirunal Institute of Medical Sciences and Technology. Subsequently, Valiathan became the first Vice Chancellor of Manipal University in 1994. Currently, Dr. Valiathan is engaged in promoting research in basic sciences based on cues from Ayurvedic concepts and procedures. The research in prominent institutes is being supported by government funding in a Sciences Initiative in Ayurveda, ASIIA. You can read his full profile on the Wikipedia page, Dr. M.S. Valiathan's. Doctor, it's really a privilege and honor to have you with us today, sir. Over to you for today's session.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, sir. Please,
Okay.
please proceed.
I am very pleased and honored to be asked to speak at this Varaha Mihra Science Forum. And I'm very happy that you have taken interest in Charaka. Caraka Samhita is an ancient text. According to present information, it was written or composed in the 1st century of the current era. But it has a long history because Charaka himself says in this book, at the end of every chapter, Agnivesha Tantra Puna Samskrite, he says that. There was a book, Agnivesha Tantra, which was an authoritative text of Ayurveda for centuries earlier, dating back to Buddhist times, or perhaps even earlier in the Takshashila University. This was taught because Agnivesha's name finds its place elsewhere also. That book had been the authoritative text, which Charaka edited, and it came to be known as Caraka Samhita. Today, nobody has heard of Agnivesha Tantra. Very few people know. This is unusual, a redaction. The redactor is known, but the original author is known. There is a reason behind this, because Ayurveda traces its origin or roots to Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda, according to conservative Western estimates, goes back to 1500 before the present era. Now, in the Atharva Veda, there are 5,000 hymns and about 1,000 prose lines. A good portion of it, maybe 20%, they all relate to illness, health, how to regain health, human body, and such subjects, far more than what you find in the other Vedas. Now, this Atharva Veda, Charaka says explicitly, those who wish to learn Ayurveda, they must be respectful to Atharva Veda. Now, Atharva Vedic medicine, however, it is a faith-based practice of medicine. The belief was illnesses were punishments awarded by gods who had been offended by our transgressions, and they punished with illness. So in treating every illness, there was a hymn addressed to a god, Indra or Agni, and so on. And this hymn was also accompanied by rituals. This was how medicine was practiced. There are many examples. I won't get into that. But when you look at Caraka Samhita, dealing with the same disease, let's say, for example, jaundice. There is a good description of jaundice treatment in Atharva Veda, how they treated, what hymn was chanted, what ritual was done, etc. But if you look at Caraka Samhita, treatment of jaundice, it is entirely different. It only talks about the symptoms of the disease, causation of the disease, possible causation, how to treat. These are very much like our modern medicine, the way we deal with it. There is no ritual. There is no mantra. Now, this very big change, a fundamental change, Charaka says in his book, in his time, medicine had become faith-based. I mean, it was faith-based in Atharva Veda time, but in his time, it had become reason-based. Deva Vyapashraya in the Atharva Vedic time. In his time, it had become Yukti Vyapashraya. He makes that statement. Now, how Caraka Samhita, this change which took place obviously gradually over 1,000 years, the concepts changed, practices changed, radical changes took place. Partly it is because of the innovations by the practitioners, and also predominantly because of Buddhism. Buddhism was the main force in India at that time, even Buddhist India, if you like, for centuries. And that is where they did not accept Vedic authority. Many of these hymns and rituals disappeared. So many such changes took place. So Caraka Samhita, when it was written, all these changes had taken place. So in this book, in a masterly way, he had brought all this together, that a new phase of medicine. That's why it became such a classic. It was not regarded as a revision of Agnivesha Tantra. Now, who was Charaka? As you know, in India, there are great names, whether Vyasa or Kalidasa, Panini, all these very great names, immense. But we know very little about them, their personality, where they live, when they live. This is a problem. They said very little about themselves, but what they wrote became immortal. Charaka was also like that. There are many people who claim that Charaka lived in the 1st century. There is a consensus more or less. But there is an equally strong belief that he lived in the 2nd century, before the present era. Even that he was the same person as Patanjali. There are all kinds of views about this, about his identity, about where he lived. We can only say he must have lived somewhere in that Kashmir, Punjab area. He was certainly very fond of Himalayas. Most of his seminars describe, they all took place in very pleasant Himalayan surroundings. So he was probably, that's all we can say. We have no other reason to say that he belonged to a particular place. That was Charaka and Caraka Samhita. Now, Caraka Samhita, he was a master physician, obviously. But he was not a physician. What does a physician do? His main business is to treat sick people, bring relief to them. So if a patient came, a good physician would examine him, make a diagnosis, and treat him and get him well. That is a good physician. But Charaka was more than that. He was a physician extraordinary. That is, suppose a patient came and he has got a particular illness, and you treat it, but then this physician, he asks, how about other people in the house? How about people in your neighborhood? Do they have this disease? What are their nutritional habits? Do the animals die in that area? All kinds of inquiries you make about that. Take interest in their surroundings, in their dietary habits. So he goes into all this and he comes with a wealth of information. Not necessary for treating that patient, but he goes beyond the individual. Or similarly, in modern day, if a patient comes with a condition called heart block, he has to have a pacemaker. All you have to do is you make the diagnosis, you put a pacemaker. That's all you have to do until you get your fees. But suppose you ask, the pacemaker costs, say, 1 lakh rupees, and this man is pulling a rickshaw. He cannot afford it. He has a small hut. He has a wife and 2 children. And on inquiry, you have to talk to him. He will not volunteer this information. And you find that they are planning to sell that house. And this pacemaker, as you know, there is a cell, and the cell has a life. In those days, old days, it was 3 years. So in 3 years, he has to buy a new cell. He has got to spend money again. And they are on the street. So now you want to do something about that. Can you get a cheaper pacemaker, which would have a similar duration? Now, if you go into that, that physician is different. He's not only good, he's something more than that. So whether it is in the area of compassion, in the area of knowledge, those who go beyond the individual, these are the extraordinary people, physician extraordinary. And this is in fact not a new concept, because many of you would have heard this story. We used to hear this in Kerala. There were 3 stone masons in Tamil Nadu, very famous stone carvers. You cannot beat them. You go to any temple, you will see this. So there was a temple, the 3 masons were stone carvers. So the first person was asked, what are you doing here? He said, I am carving the stone and I am getting 20 rupees a day. So the second person was asked. He said, they are building a temple here. I am doing this carving for that. The third person, he was also paid 20 rupees. The third person was asked. He said, they are building a Shiva temple here. And in front of the Shiva temple, there is a Nandi as Shiva's carrier. And that Nandi's eyes are always focused on the Lord's feet. He's at a lower level always. Now, at the moment, I am carving the eyes of that Nandi. It has to be focused on the feet of the Lord. That's what I'm doing. I'm paid 20 rupees. Now, here is a man. This is exactly the point. He's an extraordinary person. His work will stand out anywhere. There is people who are sensitive to art. You may look, all the Deepayakshis are the same, machine made, but they are not. If you have a sensitive mind, you will pick out some which stand out when they come towards you. Now that quality, that is what makes you extraordinary. Charaka was certainly one of these. And this kind of thinking, a thinking is the beginning of philosophy. Charaka is known always as the philosopher physician, because Vagbhata and Sushruta and Charaka, they make the great three of Ayurveda, Brihatrayi. Now, the difference mainly is Vagbhata, the latest 6th century of the present era. His book, extraordinarily fine book, poetry, Ashtanga Hridaya, that is a practice of medicine book. You can call it a very fine textbook of medicine. If you look at Sushruta Samhita existed. It is antedates Charaka. Sushruta Samhita, it is a manual of surgery and medicine. But Caraka Samhita is different because of the very large philosophical content in this book. And Charaka's philosophy, because he was a very thinking physician, as examples I gave. I'll give another example in Charaka, how philosophical he was. One of the fundamental concepts in Ayurveda, or even Indian tradition, is everything in the universe, including the human body, is composed of Panchabhutas, the 5 elements. These are not elements of the periodic table. These are the ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Now that everything is composed of these. That is a fundamental concept. Ayurveda also uses it very liberally. But Charaka did not stop with that. In Buddhist times also they talk about Panchabhuta. But Charaka goes beyond that. He says these 5 bhutas, how did they evolve? 5 things are there. And according to him, Charaka, there is an indefinable, indescribable existence that is called avyakta. Avyakta means indistinct. Now it cannot be defined. That primordial existence, there are 3 forces in it. That is the sattva, rajas, and tamas. These are in balance. Everything perfectly, there is no disturbance there at all. But that is a primordial existence. That's where it begins. Then there is an event, a perturbation takes place there, which cannot be controlled, which cannot be predicted. The moment this perturbation takes place, a chain reaction takes place, one after the other. Now that perturbation itself, that is unpredictable, uncontrollable. But what follows this chain of events, it is a cascade. It always follows the same order. So it is a chance event followed by necessity. That is perfect all the time. Now this Charaka says, this chain of events, that is what leads to the universe itself, which is perceivable by our senses. Now the first change which happens when this indistinct, there is an element of consciousness, mahat, that is the term. Consciousness comes. That is a product of the evolution. It is an evolutionary product. Then comes individuation, ahankara. That is the next. Now the next stage comes the 5 mahabhutas, these 5 elements which we talked about. Now from then you have our senses, indriyas, plus mind. Mind is the master controller of our senses, conductor of the orchestra, if you like. So those are senses and mind. And this is followed by, if you have an indriya, there must be something that the indriya must perceive. Eye has to see something. Ear has to hear something. Skin has to touch something, like that. Tongue has to taste something. So that something which it sense picks up, those are the indriyarthas. Now that is our universe. That is, we are only talking about what is accessible to the senses. We are not talking about, Charaka says specifically, Ayurveda only deals with the sensory world, what is accessible to the senses. He doesn't deny that there may be another order of reality, which is suprasensory, but he says we don't deal with that. Now, this whole question, though, and this evolution, does it, this is Sankhya system, incidentally, but Professor Dasgupta, an authoritative historian of Indian philosophy, he says that this particular 24 principles, if you count what I said, that is 24 stages. That was Charaka. He was the originator of this. Because subsequently, all those Sankhya system, they have introduced one more 25. Because Charaka's system, 24, there is no place for God. There is no place for any external agent. So if you have suffering, you are offering prayers, you are crying, there is nobody to listen to this. That is what Charaka is. In fact, many scientists, they have a passion for this Charaka's system of parinama or evolution. Dr. Ramana was one of them. He was very fond of this Charaka's parinama. But our parinama or evolution, starting from avyakta, coming to indriyarthas, what happens then? Unlike the Darwinian evolution, which is open-ended, goes on and on, we don't know where it will end. Whereas in our system, Sankhya system or Charaka system, this indriyarthas, our universe, after an infinite time, that will dissolve into avyakta again. It is cyclical. That is how our system works. Now, this whole, I have just summarized the whole thing. But this is an example of how Charaka's philosophy. There are many other examples. They are not directly applicable to treating a sick patient. This is like that carving. He doesn't have to think about the Nandi and all that. He only knows, he only had to know the craft to do it. But the work is being done. When it is charged with this special type of energy, it becomes immortal. That's why Charaka's book is being not only written in the first century. Charaka Club was formed in New York in the early part of the 20th century. Caraka Samhita is taught in all the Ayurvedic colleges. There are hundreds of them. In the University of Vienna, just 2 years ago, they were preparing a critical edition of Caraka Samhita. I wrote my redaction of Caraka Samhita in 2003. So it continues to, the fascination continues even today. Now that is the reason for Charaka's philosophy, the background of that. There are many other examples. I won't get to that. For example, destiny, he gets into that discussion. Because a patient and family coming to hospitals, they are not very much interested in the diagnosis, the name of the disease. Where does it stand in the ICD classification? They are not interested. But their one question is, what will happen to me? What will happen to my husband? That is their question. That immediately brings the question of destiny. Is human life, the lifespan, predetermined? Is it predetermined? Or can we change it? All these questions come. Lifespan, prediction of lifespan. Now that human destiny, there is a very long discussion by Charaka, very interesting. Because in there were two schools of thought in India, ancient India. One was everything is fixed by destiny. There is nothing that human beings can do. You simply accept. That's it. That is one. But there is another view, opposite, pioneered by Yoga Vasishta. Yoga Vasishta, it is called Paurushaya. We can defy. Why don't you defy this destiny? Put your entire will into it. You can change things. There is a view like that. Now, Charaka takes a middle position. Very interesting. But you can see the quality of his mind. So that is as far as the philosophical part. Then we come to diseases as a physician. Now, what kind of Caraka Samhita? It's an encyclopedic type of book. Large number of diseases are mentioned. Where the disease calls for surgical treatment, he says you take them to the Dhanvantari school. Dhanvantari was surgery. So he says you take it. But medical large number of diseases are mentioned. Excellent descriptions of diseases for diagnosis, causation of diseases he talks about. And the diagnosis was a Putumbaya, who was a professor of medicine in Vellore, greatly interested in history of Indian medicine. He wrote a very nice, very good book on history of Indian medicine. There he says in the diagnosis, ancient medicine, Charakas is better than any other he has seen, including Western textbooks. Hippocrates, Corpus Hippocraticus. Diagnosis is much better than Charakas, very, very detailed. All that is there. But I was interested when reading through this, what kind of diseases did Charaka see? Was it very much like what we have now? Now, this is difficult because in those days, there was nothing called epidemiology. There's a heart disease, so many per thousand. That kind of data didn't exist. But is there, can we get some information? And there is one way I thought this could be done. Because I worked on this, I could say something about that. If you take a modern textbook of medicine, it's a very popular book, going into many, many editions. It's Davidson's textbook of medicine, which was there 50 years ago. It's still there. Now, when I was a medical student, 1950s, if you took a textbook like Davidson, you would find, let us say, 10 pages on typhoid fever. It's a very common cause of death. Hospital wards would be full of these typhoid patients. There was no treatment. Large number of references. But if you look at coronary artery disease, I'm talking about my own experience in Trivandrum. If you take coronary artery disease, you will find probably 2 pages. We hardly saw a patient with coronary artery disease, heart attack. I remember in the final year, 1956, we had a patient admitted in the Medical College Hospital whose ECG showed a Q wave. That shows there is a heart attack. We had not seen it. We had only seen it in textbooks. So I remember all of us going to the ward to see this ECG. Today, you know, it's everywhere. So this must have been true in Charaka's time also. Because Charaka wrote a general textbook. It was not specialized cardiology, nephrology, not like that. It's a general textbook of medicine, plus philosophy, that's different. But diseases, it was encyclopedic. There, it is not equal treatment. Certain diseases, he has 10 pages. Another disease, only 2 pages. Now, that is an index of the disease load at that time. Because for the practicing doctor, he wanted to help doctors to study medicine. They will naturally give more importance to what is causing the maximum trouble, maximum death. So if you have some way of counting this, that is where computer helps. If you have digitization, you can count the number of times this disease is referred in these pages. So Professor Yamashita, a Japanese authority in our Ayurveda in the University of Kyoto, I was telling him, you know, I didn't have a digitized version. I didn't know how to make it. So I told him, if you get a digitized version, I can count this. So to ask somebody to digitize it is very difficult. That becomes a big project in itself. So Yamashita said, why do you want to do it? I have digitized. I'll send it. So I got the floppy from him. I remember counting this. 9 infectious diseases like diphtheria, typhoid, etc., and non-infectious diseases like epilepsy or leukoderma, you name it, non-infectious, diabetes. So I prepared 9 each, and I counted. And sure enough, there is something called epidemiologic transition. That means every society, when it begins, when public health services are not there, nutrition is very poor, etc., housing is bad. Under those conditions, the mortality is very high. Like India, when we became free, the lifespan in India was less than 30. I remember that very well. But today it is more than 70. Now this change from a high mortality, low lifespan era, we move to the present era. That is epidemiologic transition. This is accepted internationally. Now in Charakas, India, Northwest India, where he lived, at that time the count for infectious diseases, it exceeded 1,000. But the non-infectious diseases, the count was only 450. So at that time, that's what we would expect. They had a lot of infectious diseases at that time. They must have had a lot of mortality. Whereas what we call non-communicable diseases today, they were much less. So that gives you a general picture of the kind of epidemiology in the Charakas time. Now in medicine and the treatment, of course, they followed the usual diagnosis. As I mentioned, he was exceptionally good at this, looking at not only just the individual's illness, he looks at the society, the surroundings where he was living, condition of plants. Have you noticed plants dying in that area? All that, he goes into all that. What about the water? So that something about the environment, these are all taken into account. Then the patient's examination, no tests were done. But the patient's examination is very thorough. And they look at the constitutional type of the person. That was very important in Ayurveda, dosha prakriti. Every person is endowed with a particular prakriti, vata, pitta, or kapha. Now, these were fixed at the time of conception. So obviously they are genetic. And the importance for this in Ayurveda, in making a diagnosis, is their predisposition to diseases. Vata group, phenotype, what we call them, they are susceptible to certain diseases. Pitta, for their own. Kapha is still different. So the predisposition to diseases, that is different. You have to know that. Secondly, the response to treatment is also different. You get the same treatment, the response will not be the same. So determining this prakriti is extremely important in Ayurveda. Now, Charaka, that is also part of diagnosis. When you examine a patient, you should know this man is vata prakriti, otherwise you cannot decide the treatment. So diagnosis is a very comprehensive process. Then the treatment. And the treatment, there are several elements. Diet is the most important. In fact, Charaka's longest chapter is on food and drinks, classification of food into 10 different types, vegetables, meats. Many people think Ayurveda is all vegetarian. So that's not at all correct. So meat of different kinds, various types of drinks, including wine, which was used even in treatment. So these are some misconceptions. Even distinguished people I've heard say that Ayurveda will not recommend wine at all. It's very, very much against. That's all not correct. Ayurveda had a cheerful view on life, never recommended renunciation. Charaka in the beginning itself says there are 3 primary urges for human beings. One is to live long, pranayashana, long life. Every person wants to. Second, he says long life in poverty is miserable. You must have some wealth, some money to live. So you must get a job under the king or become a farmer or something like that. So that is vittayashana. That is second. And the third is paralokeshana, afterlife. After you die, what happens? Go to heaven or some other. Now, these are the 3 primary urges. There he says this third urge, he immediately says there is some doubt about this. Then he gives a long convoluted argument. So various sages have said this and all that. He comes to the conclusion rather reluctantly, it probably exists. That's what he says. Now, anyway, so that the attitude to life, they wanted to live long. They live for 100 years. Remember, like Vedic prayers. There are many hymns in Ayurveda. Long life in good health and happiness. So enjoyment, there was nothing against in Ayurveda. So in the diet is extremely important to treatment. Sometimes many illnesses milder illnesses can be cured simply by fasting. That is also part of this diet. And then there are a procedure called panchakarma. That is when doshas are perturbed very severely. There is a lot of dosha disturbance in the body, which cannot be treated simply by fasting and so. That requires elimination of these perturbed doshas from the body. You can call them toxins, it's not quite correct. These are metabolic products which are in excess or slightly altered. If they have to be eliminated, that is panchakarma, which is extensively used. Today, panchakarma is a common term everybody is using. Tourism, it brings lots of people. Now, this panchakarma in this treatment in Ayurveda, it is very important to realize this is not just empiricism. That is, it was used by the previous generation. My teacher used it, so I am using it. That pure empiricism, that is not the way Ayurvedic procedures are. There is always a hypothesis to back this, and this panchakarma is the best example. Panchakarma, pancha means there are 5 procedures, 5 in 1. Now that panchakarma, first there are 2 preliminary procedures. That is applying a lubricant, an oil, various types of medicated oils are there. They are applied all over the body. There is a way of doing all this. That is done. That is snehana, that is the technical term. Now this is followed by the whole body is exposed in a Turkish bath kind of place, hot fermentation. The whole body is exposed, so you will be sweating profusely. Now when both these are done, at that point, if suppose the disease is the upper part of the body and is coughing, bringing out a lot of phlegm, that is the kind of problem, upper respiratory infection or respiratory infection. Then you want to eliminate all these doshas which are accumulating in the body. And that is where the very interesting hypothesis. If something is disturbing you in the stomach, some irritant, it is easy to vomit and throw it out. If something else undesirable in the intestine, then body will throw it out as purgation. That is how they are eliminated. So the gut, starting from the mouth, going to the anal canal, that is a long chamber, if you like. Now within that chamber, it is really not part of the body. It is a chamber inside the body. So if there is something bad there, that is eliminated, thrown out. But what happens if the compartment between that chamber, that is the lining of the mucous membrane in the body, and the skin outside, that compartment, that is the real body. Between the skin outside and this mucous membrane, which lines from the mouth to the anal canal, that compartment, that is the body. Now that, it is always dark within that. And the chemical composition, the physical state, all these are different from the exterior, from within that gut itself or outside. Outside temperature will vary, but inside this temperature is always constant. Outside pH will vary, but inside the temperature is always constant. Now this disequilibrium, that is the basis of life. Only a dead body will equilibrate. A dead body, there is no difference. Exterior, interior, it's the same. That's not the same here. Now, our problem here is that the man is having a whole lot of cough and bringing out sputum, he's sick. Then things are wrong within this body compartment. Now, this compartment is crisscrossed by billions of channels called srotas. These are all in their imagination. Our sages, they had no means of seeing any of this. But they are imagining that in this compartment of the body, there are billions of channels, srotas. You cannot count. And there are things flowing through this srotas all the time, uninterrupted. If there is any block there, that is a cause of disease. Flow is interrupted. So they believed there is a serious illness like this cough with expectoration or some disease in the abdomen, bloating, diarrhea, whatever. Now, when such serious illness takes place, that body compartment is disturbed. How do you eliminate that? It is easy enough. A purgative, you can eliminate it from your intestine. You can give an emetic and make the patient throw out from the stomach. But that cannot be done here. This is a closed compartment. Now here, that is a hypothesis. They can't see any of this. But they knew that when you are eating, the food, the nutrients are getting into this compartment from the stomach and the intestine. That they knew. So there are obviously channels for things can get into that compartment. So they give a certain medicated oils. That is all decided by the Ayurvedic physician. Now this is given after this fermentation. Patient is ready. Then you give this medicated preparation. That goes into the compartment, body compartment, through these channels, through these pores in the mucous membrane. They go there, they loosen these blocks. Once they are loosened, this fermentation that you have done, it dilates like sweat is coming out. There are pores within, they also dilate. So these unblocked substances, doshas, they all come into the gut. If it is a cough, upper respiratory illness, then he will cough it out. Or if he has swallowed some of it, you can give an emetic and get it thrown out. If it is in the lower part, the abdomen, then you give a purgative or an enema, you can get it out. This is the method they follow. So the whole thing is imaginary, but this is the beginning of science. Without hypothesis, nowadays so many research projects come. There is no hypothesis. It's not interesting. And there is no good science without hypothesis. So that is an example. So Charakas, the treatment is Panchakarma. Then there are large number of formulary or Ayurvedic medicinal formulary. We have been working on it for so many years. In the 15th, 16th century, Garcia de Orta, a Portuguese physician, came. For the first time, science coming into contact with Ayurveda. He practiced medicine in Goa for 36 years and published a book called Colloquies on the Simples and Drugs of India. Large number of medicinal plants are described, how effective they are in treating tropical illnesses for which they had no treatment. And this was translated to European languages and so on. And subsequently, there have been taxonomy, as it is known, classifying medicinal plants. There have been a number of books. Even today, that study goes on. Very important. So that constitutes a very large part of formulary for treatment. Diet, procedures, these medicinal plants. And the use of animal products, of course, milk and ghee and all that are extensively used. Otherwise, the animal products are not often used in Ayurveda. There are some, for example, meat being used as medical preparation. That is there, but it's very, very small. And equally small is the use of metals and minerals, which are used extensively in the Siddha system of medicine. Ayurveda, it is very small, in the form of bhasmas, of mercury, of arsenic. All these toxic substances, bhasmas are made. And incidentally, that is an interesting question because I got interested in Ayurveda, basically modern scientific research, biological research, based on cues from Ayurveda. That is what Ayurvedic biology is. Indian Academy of Sciences published a decadal vision document in 2006 towards Ayurvedic biology, which I wrote. Now that essentially this is what we do. For example, take this question of bhasmas. Mercury is highly toxic. It is banned, the use of medicine. It was used in Western medicine also, but it has been banned for many years. It is not even used in dentistry. But mercury is used in Siddha system, in Ayurveda. And this is always a puzzle. You cannot say this is all nonsense. You cannot say that because patients are being treated. So you have to understand, is there some way that this becomes non-toxic? So that study is part of our Ayurvedic biology. And the mercury preparation what we call Magaradhwajam in Kerala, Rasa Sindoor in the north. Now this we got it specially made by Kottakkal according to the ancient prescription. And this was analyzed for us in the VARC in the Bombay, Atomic Energy. They have very fine digital research laboratory. And they showed that there is a nano transformation taking place. So the particle size is only 35, 40 angstrom. Now at that point, their properties have nothing in common with the bulk mercury. It's a paper published in the Journal of Synchrotron Radiation. It's a very important journal, widely noticed. So like that, many of these need to be investigated. But that is the kind of treatment that they would give in that. Now, that is Charaka as a physician. I would like to say, before I end this, Charaka as a teacher, because Charaka Samhita itself is very many seminars out there. There's an acharya, the students surrounding him, not too many, maybe half a dozen. And there will be a proposition or an idea articulated by the teacher, and then they all interact. There are instances where the students contradict the teacher, ask questions. All these are there. Now, Charaka says the admission to a ashram, let us say Charaka, or his teacher, Atreya, he always talks about Atreya. Now, if you want to get admission to a place like that, these were students who were in the teenage. So they are already expected to have a good education, liberal education. They should know mathematics. They should know something about Vishwakarma Vidya, handcraft, all the education, grammar, poetry, so good knowledge, that is expected. But apart from that, it is very important that their physical health, good health, mental, intellectual ability, behavioral, all these are checked very, very carefully. Then only that admission is taken. And once they are admitted, they stay in the ashram. This is a little higher than the primary, than the 5-6 years when they go to Gurukula, that's a different Gurukula. This is a different. Now here, this we have a very good example in the when you read this Charaka Samhita, the ways of teaching. They had to learn a lot by heart. It is not because there was no writing or books, they existed, but they were encouraged. Many important things they had to learn by heart. My own teacher of Ayurveda, Rahul Tivilpot, once told me, I asked him about this. In his time, he was a Gurukula student. He said he had to learn the whole of Ashtanga Hridaya by heart. And I asked him if the books are available. He said, yeah, they are available. When the patient comes, he tells you his symptoms. You are going to read the book. Come and treat him. What do you think? His impression about you. So he silenced. So in those days, they were encouraged, learning by heart. But it is specifically mentioned. You should understand the meaning of what you are doing. That is there. So that was there. And the teacher, they had to accompany the teacher when he was going on domiciliary visits, examining the patient, collecting medicinal plants, identifying medicinal plants. Often these medicines were made in the Acharya's own ashram, so that they had to help in cooking, because that is part of Ayurveda. So a large practical experience, like when you go to a patient's place, observing how the atmosphere in the place, all these things they were encouraged, the apprenticeship with this. That is also part of it. Now that Charaka says the teaching, one is discourse by the Acharya. That is there. But far superior, and learning by rote, that is there. But the most important is Sambhasha, that is seminars, where the teacher and the students, they interact freely, can come to a conclusion. For example, questions like embryology, developmental biology. When the embryo develops, how does it develop? What is the first organ to appear? There is a long discussion of it. 3 months, the embryology, from the time of 8 weeks or 9 weeks, the embryo begins to form. It's a cluster of cells, then it begins to divide, then disappears, that appears like that. There is a long description. And the 3rd month, the mind appears, according to Ayurveda. And the soul also comes through the mind. All these are described. Now, these are sometimes important because obviously they could not have, it is not imagination. Unless they had seen abortuses, they could not have written this. Which organ forms? Limbs are forming, limb buds are there, head is forming. All these, they have observed abortuses, otherwise they could not have written this. But there was a discussion a few years ago in the WHO when there was a question of stem cells, how these things become suddenly important. The stem cells time, there was a lot of discussion on when can you do research on stem cells, because they are totally potential. They can grow into any type of cell in the body. They have that potential, totally potential. Now that time, if you can take in theory, you can create a human being, because that cell is capable of doing it. Now, internationally, UNESCO, WHO, they wanted an international agreement on this, that one country will not do creating a new type of human being or non-human being. So that discussion, when it came, many scientific, Indian representative, I happen to know one of them, she was telling me that discussion was going on. The Jews had their own religious views. When does it become an individual? A cluster of cells is not an individual. You can take it and use it for your research. So these arguments were going on. Christians, they had their own. Islam, they had very many others. But there was nobody from India. So she was telling me, I didn't know anything about this. I didn't say anything. So I was telling her, well, you should have said this. Here is very clearly they are talking about when does it become an individual? When consciousness comes. That is mind and the soul. That is what, then it is individual. You can't take anything. So these are all described in these discussions. There is a particular discussion where this subject comes, the students don't agree with the teacher. So it goes on like that. So Caraka says that is the best way of medical education. So I would say that Caraka is an extraordinary physician, extraordinary saintly person, philosopher, physician. You can call him by all these great names. And he says the purpose of medicine, the aim of medicine, I will conclude with that. He says, Natmartham, Nabhikamartham, Ata Bhutadeyam Prati. You practice medicine not for your selfishness, not for fulfilling your desires, but for compassion. That is what he says. I think that is a great thing to conclude a talk on Caraka. Thank you.
Doctor, that was a fantastic introduction to Caraka. For some of us with very limited information, or we have just read just a single line in a school textbook a little bit. You worked on a translation of the manuscript. So how was that experience of, firstly, why did you choose this in the first place? I mean, what drove you to even look at these ancient texts with your background in modern medicine? And how was this entire experience of taking these ancient texts and translating? While, at one end, your modern education will be continuing to come along while you are working on it. I would like to understand that a little bit.
That's an interesting question. I'll give an interesting answer also. Towards the end of my surgical career in the 1990s, I had been doing it for more than 25 years. I was in Trivandrum, so every day we had operations. I was struck by this fact that in the operating room, where we do open heart surgery, there will be around 12 people there, all different type, patient included. The surgeon, the assistant, the nurse, technician, so many people are there. And we use a lot of equipment during the operation. We use drugs. Now, it dawned on me that in that theater, everything except the human beings, everything was important. The ideas that open heart surgery can be done. That is heart and lung, you stop, you can open the heart and do a corrective procedure. That concept itself, starting with concepts, the equipment, the drugs, you name it, everything is important. There is not a single thing which is Indian. This used to bother me. And then I found it's not only cardiac surgery. Every part of medicine is like this. Everything is important. Why is it like this? Western medicine had been in India since the British brought 19th century, they brought it here. Phenomenal growth, 60,000 doctors being produced. We claim we have the best doctors in the world. We do everything here which the United States is doing. I keep hearing all this. But the fact is like this. Everything is important. Ideas, equipment, procedures. Why is it like this? The whole field of medicine. And I remembered Shockley, who was a physics Nobel laureate, 1960s, I was in the United States when he made a statement that these path-breaking discoveries, revolutionizing human life, that is only possible by white people. Others may make some changes, do some good work, but they are not of this class. And he was severely criticized for it, attacked and so on. But he stood his ground. I remember that. I thought maybe there is a touch of that. He may be right. How is it in 200 years we are not able to do anything here? We have not discovered the cause of a disease here. We have plenty of diseases here. We have not discovered anything. We have not discovered a practice of anything, including surgery, in India, which is internationally used, like Raman spectroscopy, for example. That's an example. Discovery made here, which is used all over the world. Raman spectroscopy. Is there anything comparable in medicine? The answer is no. Now, this started worrying me. Are we so sterile intellectually? Then it occurred to me, after all, this medicine came only 250 years ago or 200 years ago. Medicine has been practiced here for centuries. People were treated. We have records of that. Why can't we read it? How did they treat? Still people go to these physicians. That is how I wanted to study it. And I was giving a lecture in the Raman Institute. After I came to Manipal, I given up cardiac surgery. I became a my retirement. I came to Manipal as a vice chancellor. Shortly after that, the Raman Institute called me to give the Gandhi lecture, which is a very prestigious lecture there. I talked about Charaka there. I was reading Charaka. And first thing which struck me was he was not just an ordinary physician. There is a great deal of philosophy, thinking, sometimes thinking the unthinkable. He had extraordinary. So that's where I was caught of this. So I gave the lecture in the Raman Institute. I remember Satish Dhawan was sitting in the front row. After the lecture, he came to me and said, Valiathan, I have heard this name Charaka, but I had no idea that such ideas had been conceptualized here. You should write on this. I remember he's telling me. It is a big encouragement for me. That is how I got, because a manual of medicine that sick people, I had plenty of those. These symptoms are there, diagnosis, treatment. That's the end of it. Now that is my bread and butter. I've been doing it all this time. This goes beyond that. Beyond individual, it goes to the universal. It is every state. So Charaka appealed to me.
Okay. Now, the second part of my question, while you are doing the translation, while you are studying, naturally you would be comparing. I mean, the work is to translate. That's going at one level. But you have all your life, you have studied Western medicine, or what we call as Western medicine, I mean, allopathy, whatever it is, right? So that's the training that you have had. And when you are reading this text, when you are analyzing this text, you would naturally be comparing the two. Did that result in some kind of sort of a summary conclusion idea about comparisons between these two forms of medicine?
No, I had no conflict. I think they The most essential is to have the quality called humility. If you think that you know everything, you don't have to Western medicine, which I practiced. I like that. I admire it, revere it, because I learned all my cardiac surgery from masters.
Right.
Great reverence for them. And but if I believe that that contains everything, there is nothing, I don't have to learn anything beyond this, then I'm making a mistake.
Okay.
That is so then I think you're going to miss a lot in life. So you begin to look at it with as much, some prejudice will be there. I'm not saying that I'm so totally impartial. I'm not like that. I'm an ordinary human being. But I realize my limitations. What the limitations of my knowledge, I know that. So when you start learning Ayurveda, I went to an Acharya in Kerala, who was past 80, a great scholar, still seeing patients, still students coming to him, a very great Acharya. He was very surprised. I was 65, I was not young. When I finished my vice chancellor, the very next day I went and met him in his small town in Kerala. So he asked me, how come I was known there? He said, Doctor, you're coming here to me. How come you're coming? You're a surgeon. He was very surprised. Right. But he understood I was not going with any superiority attitude at all. I was willing to learn. And when they talk about Panchakarma, what impresses me is the hypothesis. In 2000 years ago, people could have a hypothesis, that is metabolites accumulating in the body, how to eliminate it from the body. Here they're thinking of, these are wonderful, great. It could not be done in that way. That is a different matter. But you see some results also. So you begin to, that humility is very necessary when you are learning anything new. And now, of course, we know, we talk about plasticity, neuroplasticity. You start learning, suppose when you're 60, you're going to learn something totally different. You're going to learn violin. You're interested in music, but you have not played violin. You have been an engineer. You decide to learn violin. And when you start playing, because of genuine love, not because of anything else, not because of compulsion or money, out of your own, you want to learn. And you learn from a master. You will find that by the time, say 5 years, you are playing violin. You may not play better than your teacher or a professional player. You will be different, but sometimes you may play very unique tunes. That is also because the wiring system is changing. When you learn something, you are establishing new neuronal mechanisms. That is the wiring in the body. Cells are constant, they don't change. But the wiring is plastic, that can change. That also would happen to me. When I'm learning Ayurveda, I'm thinking differently in certain matters. So it becomes interesting.
Okay. Thank you. There are a couple of questions from Sriram Naganathan. So one is, one challenge in dealing with the ancient text is that of interpolation. Mahabharata, for instance, is known to have plenty.
Yes.
Given the antiquity of Caraka Samhita, how was this challenge taken up?
I think the interpolations in Mahabharata, etc., will be much greater. Because here Charaka, it's a highly specialized area. So it's not a public document in that sense. Only very specialized people will try to do this. But we do know that I mentioned that critical edition of Caraka Samhita, Vienna University. Now, Charaka's own, he says that I have redacted Agdivesha Tantra. That he says. Every chapter he says. Now, Agdivesha Tantra we know existed because Caraka Samhita we have today, the best commentary is that called Ayurveda Deepika, written by a Bengali physician called Chakrapani. He lived in the 10th century. That Chakrapani's Deepika, when you read that, it is often necessary to understand Charaka. Difficult areas, you have to read this. There he actually quotes from Agdivesha Tantra. So we know that existed. In 10th century it was there. And it may still be discovered in our collection, Indian manuscripts, 2 million manuscripts and all that. I won't be surprised, like Bhasa's place being discovered. It may be discovered. Then we will know what was there and what is Charaka has written different. Today we don't know that. So that we don't know what was Adivesha Tantra, what is Charaka, that we don't. But Caraka Samhita, within 200 years of his passing away, already some portions were lost. Some sthanas were lost. And that was Dhritabala, a Kashmiri physician. He is the one who edited. That is on record.
Okay.
Those textual changes are there.
Okay. But I agree with you. The religious text, Itihasa, they all have, there is also a reason for possible interpolation because
Yes.
you have your own ideas and you want to sort of insert.
Exactly.
Here,
exactly.
unless you are another qualified medical practitioner and
Yes.
you want to just add some of your own discoveries, as if like Charaka has given.
That's correct. Yes.
True. That's true. The second question from Shriram Naganathan is any progress being made in an earlier proposal by you, that is yourself, sir, on linking the phenotype of Ayurveda with genetics?
Yes.
You did mention when you talked about Vada, Pitta, Kapha.
Yes. I'm very glad to say that this is one project. I didn't want to get into individual projects, but this is one of the very important projects we did. We means many institutions are involved. What we did was the Vada, Pitta, Kapha individuals, they are not patients, they are healthy young individuals. They were, samples were taken from Udupi, from Bangalore and Pune. That is where we could find physicians who could cooperate with us. So Ayurvedic physicians would identify these subjects. And Vata, Pitta, Kapha, they classified. But we had a great worry that what they classify, we want to make it a little rigorous. Because if these same people are seen by some other physician, he may not agree with this. Can we make it a little rigorous, this selection? Then we found this question was being discussed. At that time, we found from Pune, Pune University, CSIR, 2 or 3 other groups, they had been working on this dosha prakriti, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, the primary prakriti. And what they did was this, our ancients, Charaka, for example, he will say the physical traits, mental traits, behavioral traits. Now, these traits are all described for Vada, Pitta, Kapha. Sushruta does it. They are not identical, but similar. And Vata. So, these are available. The traditional physician, because of their wrong experience, they see somebody and talk to him half an hour, 45 minutes. During that, they watch this person very well. They listen to him and so on. And they make a decision. This is Vada, Pitta. This is how it is done. But this is not entirely acceptable today. We would like it to make it a little more rigorous. What the Pune group did was they gave scores for each of these traits. So when they find that, for example, the traits for Kapha is exceeding 30, 60%, then that is like that. This they had done and published, but they had never actually used it in any research. They established this metric. We thought we will use that for this. So we went and talked to them. They gladly agreed. And we sent MD Ayurveda for training how to use this computer-assisted determination. Very simple. So all these subjects, whether in Udupi, Bangalore or Pune, subjects a traditional physician determines, traditional physician, 10 years is in active practice, such people. They have determined, and then the same people, without letting know what the determination was by the traditional physician, they go to this young physician with a computer sitting there. He evaluates them. So these are, it's blinded. Now we decided in the beginning itself, only when they agree, that subject alone will be taken for our study, because we are looking at molecular markers, and these are very expensive SNPs and all that. So we have to be only when they agree. And I usually feared that there may be no agreement at all. That was my worry when we started. But surprisingly, 75% there is agreement. That paper we have actually published. So we had subjects from all these, some 3,000 subjects, it's a big study. And the institutions which cooperated, one is our Ayurvedic College in Udupi and our own Mahe, Udipal Academy. molecular biology, Indian Institute of Science, Kondai, I was there. And Pune, Kalpana Joshi, she's a professor of biotechnology. And from CCMB, Hyderabad, where all the DNA work was done, Govind Raj and others. So we had all these big institutions involved in this. It took 4 years to do this, and very clearly it is shown that there is a genomic basis for this Ayurvedic phenotypes. That is published in Nature reports, and that year, 20,000 inquiries were there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great, great. There's some very interesting questions. Couple of them from Arvind Iyer and more from Professor Mohanan. Let me just quickly go through them. Now, from Arvind Iyer, one of the questions he asks is, besides the Caraka Samhita's general model of a human body based on dosha composition, are there specific models of the body of a child human, adult human, or a male human and female human?
No, there is no such. There are descriptions of treating children, women, that is all there. But there is no such characterization, as far as I know.
Okay. And the other question from him is, does Caraka anywhere acknowledge similarities of human bodies with bodies of other animals? Or does he treat the human body as an exclusive category of its own with nothing else like it in the nature?
No, Caraka has anatomy, but it's very brief. He doesn't go into it greatly. But Sushruta has a very detailed description of anatomy. I mean, there is a Caraka also, for example, the bones, number of bones in the body. Caraka says it is 360, which is the same as Ayurveda. But Sushruta says it is only 300. It's not 360. He says that. So that this kind of descriptions are there. But we can only assume their anatomy was very not very reliable, because dissection. Caraka also says that Sushruta also, you must dissect the human body. That's the only way you can learn anatomy. But in those days, there were very severe taboos about dead body.
Right, right.
Even today, if you touch a body, you have to have a bath before you get into the house and all that. So
right.
It was much more severe. So in Sushruta's time, he describes this in a dark place, isolated, where nobody goes. A dead body in a shallow water, in a wooden crate, this dead body is put and kept in this water, in a dark place so that people don't see it. And then after 3-4 days, when the body is rotting, then you start dissecting. And dissection, you don't use knife to cut. So you have to use the sharp edge of a leaf, or you have to use wooden splinters.
Okay.
So you scrape off layer by layer. That is how the dissection is done. So the description of soft parts, anatomy, it cannot be correct. You know it very well. Bone, cartilages and all that, yes, you can more or less rely. But it is a very crude way of doing it. This was how it was done. So it is not correct, exact. There are big differences up there. Similarly, the counting, like cartilage, they consider it as bone. The prominence of certain bones, which we call protuberance. Now that will be considered as a separate bone, like that. There are difference in the nomenclature, that is there. But they knew anatomy. There is no question about that. But Sushruta Samhita, they knew the limitations. So one of the things they did was animals being sacrificed. Animal sacrifice was what we call for all the yajnas and all that. So that was one way they were watching. Similarly, in wartime, doctors were always there in war. So they would watch, for example, somebody had a big cut in the axilla or the neck, they can see that.
Okay.
So regional anatomy, they paid a lot of attention. This marma concept, for example, in Ayurveda, there's a section called marma, vital spots. A lot of it is from this kind of observation, regional anatomy, where they find an artery and the vein and the nerve all concentrating in one area, one joint, they will say that is a marma. So regional anatomy, they had some understanding. And the reason Sushruta says the importance is you don't make any incisions there. when you do surgical operations, you should avoid these spots because there are vital structures there.
Right.
Regional anatomy was a supplement to
Okay.
the imperfect understanding of the matter.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. There is a question from Madhusudan and Veeraraghavan. Is there any data on diabetes and blood pressure cures and best practices in Charaka?
No, Charaka talks about diabetes, Madhumeha. Actually, it is a section on the polyuria, excess urine. That is the chapter. So there are different types of polyuria. People have black urine, for example, black water fever, excess urine which is not sweet. Diabetes insipidus, we call it, and the diabetes mellitus, sweet diabetes. So all these different types of polyurias Charaka describes, and one of them is diabetes. That he describes. Treatment is describes, but he also says it is very difficult to treat.
Okay. Okay. There is again. Let me come to a couple of these questions from Professor Mohanan. One is where he says Ayurveda, which is a form of reason-based knowledge, has now decayed into faith-based knowledge in teaching, in practice, and in research. How can it be guided back to reason-based knowledge?
That is a very, very difficult question. You know, we were always, even in our ancient prayers, from darkness lead me to light. So I can only say this. We have so much of fake information going on, not only in medicine, in every field. So it is not easy to, in fact, Ayurvedic, sometimes I have gone and I used to go to Ayurvedic colleges and talk to the students. And many of them, after my lecture there, I am an outsider. I always tell them, I'm not an Ayurvedic physician. I'm a friend of Ayurveda. That's all I am. So treat me like that. So many times they would come and tell me, sir, this is not the way we are taught. So
okay.
I am always struck by that. Because I remember, especially Kottakkal, I had gone. There is a brilliant student who had come and given a welcome speech and all that. Then the next day, I was going to the airport. 2 or 3 students, usually this happens. Students always long drives to the airport. They ask questions. So there were 3 students. I was going from Kottakkal to Calicut. It's about an hour. So they kept on asking. And finally, mostly practical things, including their prospects and all that. So I was telling them as we were approaching Calicut, I told them, you know, we have been talking about all these day-to-day things which are very important. But you must also have a loftier vision. And you don't have to go very far. Vagbhata, in his Ashtanga Hridaya, Vagbhata was a supreme poet. He has a verse there. He says, salutations to the great physician. That is how he says. That salutation, that word comes again and again. It says, Vishajam Sadhu Vruttana, Bhadram Agamashalina, Abhyasta Karmanam Bhadram Bhadra Abhilashina. What it means is salutations to the physicians who have familiarity with the great texts, agamas, like Caraka Samhita. That's not the end. Then he says that is theoretical knowledge. That's the first. Second, Bhadram Agamashalinam, Abhyasta Karmanam Bhadram. You should be skilled in using your hands. Abhyasta Karma. You should be very good in using your hand, manual skill. Bhadram Agamashalina. The last Agamashalina, Bhadram Bhadra Abhilashina. That is the last what he mentions there. Wishing for the good of everybody. Goodwill for all. Bhadram Bhadra Abhilashinam. Salutations to the physician. So theoretical knowledge, manual skill, and goodwill for all. So I told the students, you should take your practice to that level. That is what Vagbhata says. I remember they were telling me, sir, this is not the way we are taught. So, I remember that very well.
There is a further question from Professor Mohanan. He says, Avyakta in Advaita philosophy could be Brahman, but in Sankhya philosophy, it is a combination of Prakriti and Purusha.
Yes.
Would it be meaningful to equate Prakriti as the unmanifest source of matter and Purusha as the unmanifest form of energy as a foundation for a dualist theory of the evolution of that integrates the evolution of the physical, biological, mental, and the societal? I don't know if it is.
I would only put it this way. It is true that Avyakta is that indeterminate state of existence. Now, there is nothing, there are only these forces of Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic. These are forces. They are not substances. And they are in balance, equilibrium, when nothing happens. Then there is a perturbation. I didn't want to use the word big bang. There's something like that, unpredictable, uncontrollable. Now that happens. And then the chain follows. In all that, there is that Prakriti, that term which later on came, that the first, up to the Panchabhutas, up to that, there are 8 things. Panchabhutas plus the early Avyakta, Mahat, Ahankara, and these 5, that is called Prakriti, according to the Sankhya, or Caraka Samhita also. Caraka doesn't use Tanmatras, for example. He doesn't use them. But in this classical Sankhya, there is Tanmatras, which immediately precede this Panchabhutas.
Okay.
Now, when we talk about Indriyas, mind, hearing, all those things, they are coming after Panchabhuta. They are made of Panchabhutas. That is the Sankhya concept. The only difference, Purusha, that term comes because in Charaka's Nirishwara Sankhya, there is no God in it. In Charaka Sankhya. I mentioned that. There is no Ishvara there. There is no Purusha there. But this is something which ordinary people cannot accept.
Right.
This is my interpretation, because Shankaracharya, who Vedanta is very much like this. Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya, that. But Shankaracharya, who was a staunch Vedantist, he was writing Bhaja Govindam later. It is all bhakti. So Seshwara, he believes in God. So similarly, Sankhya Karika, which is considered the authoritative book on Sankhya, written by Ishvara Krishna, that is 200 years after Charaka. Now there are 25 principles. Panchavimsati. Chaturvimsati is Charaka, 24. This 25th is Purusha is coming. That is Ishvara is coming. Because that makes it acceptable to people. Because a world without hope, to whom we cannot appeal, there is nobody there. That is too harsh a doctrine. I remember Dr. Ramana and I, we used to discuss this. He says, it is a kind of weakness to accept that we need somebody to cry on shoulders and all that. He used to say. But I said, what is the problem? The common, that is how this Seshwara Sankhya came. If you make it too harsh, then there will be no takers for it. Even Shankaracharya, why is the talking? It is very beautiful. But Charaka was Bhula Sankhya, the original Sankhya.
Okay.
There is no Purusha there.
Okay. Technical question from Shantala. I may probably mispronounce it. Let me read it. A specific question regarding Parkinson's. Treatment of Kampavata, can a dying substantia nigra, sorry if I pronounce it wrongly, that produces dopamine in deep brain be revived using Ayurvedic treatment?
Yes.
I hope I have read it properly.
No, you have read it correctly. Kampavata is known, and this medicinal plant is also Mucuna pruriens. It is known, it is used extensively, and it does produce good results. But we don't have any long-term studies of this. And I know personally that a good friend of mine who is a physician, came from the United States. He went to a very famous Ayurvedic center. He got Discompovada standard treatment. He improved. But the unfortunate thing is they all get recurrence, very large proportion. But I don't have the numbers. Nobody has, to my knowledge, there is no, which is a great pity. 100 patients have been treated over a period of, say, 5 years. And this is the palliation. This is the incidence of recurrence. This kind of data we don't have. Not only Ayurveda, we are very poor in this. Modern medicine also. We treat so many coronary artery bypass surgeries, every 5,000 we have done. But how many of them are patent after 5 years? That kind of information, long term, that we don't have. That's why we cannot really make internationally a name, because people respect you when your treatment, the results are durable. And so here the problem with this Kampavada treatment, there is no question that it works, that particular medicinal plant. But we have no long-term results available. So that is where it stands. And there may be others also like this, but studies have to be done.
Okay. Just a couple of questions. I think you've covered all the questions that the viewers have asked. One of the things that when I'm looking at the social media, where doctors who are practitioners of modern allopathic medicine have some fairly adverse comments about Ayurveda, in the sense that not Ayurveda per se, but it eventually becomes that, where they talk about some patients who come to them and how they have been wrongly treated or whatever it is, which has resulted in liver getting damaged, or some of the fairly severe adverse effects, which is sort of almost impossible to fix. People come back to the regular doctors. Now I'm using the word regular, alternate, very, very casually, not with any intention. But these are talked about as if like the Ayurvedic treatment process is not being, careful enough in treating their patients. The net result is that the patients are seriously affected. Now, I don't know whether it's an acceptable generic statement, but how do we make sure that these two systems that are currently prevalent to work together in a manner where these adverse impact on patients be considerably reduced or completely eliminated?
I think the problem here is not the Ayurveda or modern medicine. The problem is our drug regulation is hopeless.
Okay.
Ayurvedic medications, for example, the formulary, Ayurvedic formulary, Health Ministry, Ayush Ministry has been at it for many years. I think there are 4 or 5 volumes now. But what I understand is that covers only around 500 formulations.
Okay.
Where they give the composition, what are the medicinal plants, etc., etc. But in the market, there are more than 1,500 formulations.
Okay.
In other words, there is no authority. If you take some medicine from somewhere, if you want to find out what is the prescribed standard for this, you have to have that. That doesn't exist. We have only, this is what I've heard, 500 or so. In market, you get 1,500. So how can you have any regulation? And secondly, there are no test laboratories, except the very big labs. They may have their own protocol, they have their own, some others may have. But bulk of manufacturing is taken place in small and medium industries. They cannot establish laboratories. And the government should provide that analytical help, but whatever is given is very little. So therefore, if you don't provide a regulatory regime, you don't have the standards, then naturally all sorts of things will be given. So it is a collapse of that system. It is not Ayurveda or modern medicine. Modern medicine, in fact, Minister Ramdas, when he was health minister, he said in a public meeting that 50% of the drugs in modern medicine are adulterated. He said that. You have heard Ranbaxy, for example, very big name in drug manufacturing. They went into bankruptcy, and the reason was they had a plant in Himachal Pradesh. They were manufacturing drugs which they were exporting to the United States.
Mm.
Billions of dollars, very prominent manufacturer.
Right. Right.
And finally, they found that this drug manufacturing was not according to standards. They closed down the whole place. Now, the interesting thing is, FDA took action, but the same drugs were being sold in India, but we didn't take any action.
My God. Okay.
So, human lives are cheap here. That's the answer for that.
So I understand, one of the most important thing that we should then focus on is the a regulatory system,
Exactly.
a regulatory body and certification, and how Ayurvedic drugs are produced and distributed in the market has to be highly regulated. Okay.
Even the raw material, for example, today, all these medicinal plants, who supplies them? Identity of these? How do you? It's very unscientific. Nobody checks with the raw material that you are getting. This is the root of some plant. This is something. There are very few places we can check the purity of this. So there are a number of problems. So I don't think we should condemn Charaka and all that. This is our own misdemeanor.
Yeah, which really tells me, the interesting thing about the modern medicine is that it has completely removed the drug making from a doctor.
Correct.
And it is a completely separate structure by itself. And the physician merely diagnoses and then recommends the drugs, which are then, properly out there in the market. And, you could go to any shop and get that. Some similar system, I think, can be
It is actually a similar system is coming in Ayurveda also. Because manufacturing, now the Ayurvedic physicians, very few of them make the medicines themselves. They also prescribe. But the industry is very, very small.
Got it.
Much of the manufacturing is done by small industries. They cannot have analytical laboratories, etc.
I understand. Yeah, that is where the regulation and support help. Whatever is required to clean up that industry would help substantially. Great. And one final question is, having done enough work here, and how do you see the Ayurveda as a system of treatment establish itself in the coming years in India? I mean, there is it's very much thriving at a certain level, but at highly educated persons may think twice about going to such hospitals. Now, how do you see the whole progress? I mean, everything from students taking up and studying that to patients looking at that system of medicine in practical terms.
This is a prediction. I'm not very good at it, but I can tell you, looking back, you see, in Atharva Veda time, suppose we lived there, how did they treat? This is very eminent physicians. They would have mantras, they would do all that. Some of us will get well, some of them will die. All these things happen in those days.
Okay.
Charaka's time, things were very different. No mantras, nothing. It is the same Ayurveda. Practice was very different. Results were very different. Now, this change took place over a long period of time. Getting rid of mantras, getting rid of rituals, accepting new medications, new diagnostic concepts. All these things took gradually over a long period. Similarly, here, if modern medicine has to accept certain concepts from Ayurveda, Ayurveda has to accept certain things from modern medicine. If this is not going to happen by 5 years, the committee is sitting there and writing a report. And then this is what they are trying to do here since independence. There are so many committees, integrated medicine, this medicine, that medicine. Nothing is going to happen. These cannot be done in 5 to 10 years. It takes a long time. People with goodwill, people wishing the good of everybody, that kind of full of knowledge, skilled, such people, they are the people contributing little bits. So you will find if that happens, in a matter of 200 years, you will find a new medicine, which will be, you cannot call it allopathy or Ayurveda. It will be a new type of medicine.
Okay.
That is what will come.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Valiathan. It was fascinating insight that we could get into not just the main topic, which is Caraka Samhita, but also the whole things around that, with your experience in modern medicine and your approach to the question that you started with saying, what have we done? Everything is imported. Now, the point with which you started, we are aware that you have been part of one of the inventions in the heart valve, which if, in fact, there is a message. I would like to read it here. I might as well read it. Just give me a second. So, one of our Rajagopal, who is here, his friend has sent a message saying, I personally knew Dr. Valiathan when he was the director of Sri Chitra Medical Institute, Trivandrum, which was literally established by him from scratch. He was instrumental in developing an indigenous heart valve, which he named as Chitra valve. Our company, Medtronic USA, was closely associated with his R&D efforts. Glad to listen to him after many years. So it's a message from someone whose name I can't see. Maybe Rajagopal can mention his name. Swaminathan. So we are really glad to hear such messages. As people are following this particular talk. So we are really thankful to you for your presence here. One of my personal comments, which I will anyway talk to you subsequently. I'm also a publisher. I publish books in Tamil, and I would like to get permission from you to publish the books that you have written, the legacy of Caraka and the other two, Vagbhata and Sushruta, and also an introduction to Ayurveda. I quickly noticed some of them, and I would love to talk to you to see if we can get all of them in Tamil to reach out to a set of audience here.
Very nice. Yes.
Thank you for your presence, and we are truly honored and blessed that you could make this session a great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.